Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Awakening Podcast. The drama that is going on in the White House right now. Wow. Trump is really under some pressure. The trade talks between China and US didn't go so well, which is what I expected. Just like many other issues President Trump is going after at the beginning of his second term, they seems to be all hitting a wall. Ukraine peace talk is not going anywhere. Fight seems to be escalating, not de-escalating. There's no major trade agreement anywhere between the United States and any other countries. The agreement with the United Kingdom is more ceremonial if you read the details. Elon Musk left the Trump administration and immediately started to criticize Trump's policy, the big beautiful bill, saying the following quote, I'm sorry, but I just can't stand it anymore. This massive, outrageous, port-fielded congressional spending bill is a disgusting abomination, end quote. You guys are seeing all this in real time. In fact, Chinese social media and also Taiwan social medias are all hinting that the phone conversation between Donald Trump and Xi Jinping that happened just several hours ago is about Trump surrendering to China's term regarding Taiwan. There were rumors that Elon Musk even got into a fight with Secretary of Treasury Scott Bessent in the White House during the Italian Prime Minister's visit a few weeks ago. Their verbal exchange was so loud that the surrounding rooms in the White House could hear them. Elon Musk also accused Scott of being a Soros agent. A Soros agent. Let's talk about that today, shall we? One one of the main reason I started this channel is to, present to my audience a Chinese perspective of the world, especially when most of you do not understand Mandarin, do not have direct access to Chinese media space. Given that the world's tension today is centered around the competition between United States and China, I felt like it would be difficult for you, even if you are intelligent and dedicated to geopolitics. It will still be difficult to put the whole picture together, to connect the dots, because there's a whole Chinese side of the story you do not have access to, since there's a language barrier, right? It is my job to fill in those blind spots so you can better understand the macro dynamic that's behind all these things that are happening in front of our eyes today. Let's travel back to 1997.
Thailand's prime minister resigned under fire today, becoming the first political casualty of Southeast Asia's economic crisis. The government struggled to find a new leader as the country's currency and stock market continued to fall.
The Asian financial crisis took many Asian countries by surprise. US based hedge fund launched a series of attacks against new rising Asian economies, preying on their monetary vulnerabilities because their own currency is piggybacked to the US dollar and had borrowed extensively US dollar debt due to a period of low interest rate. Hedge funds use this opportunity to bet heavily against the currency of countries like Thailand, South Korea, Malaysia, and Indonesia, expecting their value to drop. By selling large amounts of those currencies and shorting their assets, they caused panic, forcing those countries to burn through their US dollar reserve currency to rescue their own currency. And when their currency runs out, these countries were forced to devalue their currency and often seek IMF for a costly bailout. One after another, these countries' financial market collapsed. Thailand was the first country to give up, followed by Indonesia, South Korea, all seeking IMF intervention. October 1997. The storm has reached Hong Kong. The Hong Kong dollar came under heavy speculative pressure through large short selling. However, the Chinese government saw this coming and decided to go all out to defend these speculative attacks. And this move, in a way, marks one of the most critical moments of China's modern day history. I was living in Hong Kong between 1992 to the year 2000. I lived in a district named Happy Valley, which is centered around the Happy Valley Racecourse, one of the most famous horse racing course in Asia. My parents and we were living in an apartment right next to the most famous private hospital in Hong Kong, the Hong Kong Sanatorium and Hospital. If you go down the block from where I lived, around 300 meters away, there's a grocery store named Park and Shop, where most of the locals get their groceries. Across the street, just right across the street from that grocery store, is a very skinny, tall building. And part of that building is dedicated to house Chinese diplomats and employees, beginning from when Hong Kong was still a British colony. To begin with, Happy Valley is an upscale district, and it is also very close to the famous Xinhua News Agents building, which is considered at that time the de facto Chinese embassy in Hong Kong, the Chinese shadow government at that time during the British colony era. Now, during that time I was in Hong Kong, that building housed a certain important individual who is going to decisively change the fate of Hong Kong and also of China, which is more or less related to also what's going on today between US China, the tension and the competition. His name is Zhu Rongji, who eventually became the second in command in China, the premier of the State Council of the PRC. I was 9 years old, 10 years old during that time, around 1995, and I often bump into Zhu Rongji when I was there in the grocery store picking up grocery for my mom.
最要負責係政府，政府點解？政府，因為政府咧知道佢哋呢啲證券公司有財務公司都唔提醒，即係。
August 1997, hedge funds from the United States began shorting the Hong Kong dollar, same way they did in Thailand. The company that was leading the charge was a hedge fund named Quantum Fund, which was co-founded by George Soros and Jim Rogers. It was originally named Double Eagle Fund and later named Quantum Fund and became one of the most successful hedge funds in history. During the Asian financial crisis, the major operator and strategist within the Quantum Fund and the mother company also, the Soros Fund Management, was George Soros, and behind the scene, Stanley Druckenmiller and the young Scott Bessent. The president of China, Jiang Zemin, was a very smart guy. He knew exactly what's going on, so he sent forth his champion, Zhu Rongji, to face this financial onslaught. Zhu Rongji, of course, is not just a random guy I bumped into in the grocery store. He was the governor of the People's Bank of China between 1988 to 1995 and became the vice premier in 1993. He was effectively in charge of China's economic and financial defense against the crisis and played a leading role in formulating China's response, the economic czar of China. He was sent to Shenzhen to organize and oversee the defense against the siege of Hong Kong by George Soros and his team. The US-led hedge fund unleashed what we call a dual attack strategy, shorting both the Hong Kong dollar to pressure the currency piggybacking and also shorted the Hang Seng Index, expecting the Hong Kong Monetary Authority to raise interest, which would crash the stock market. This was known as the double play strategy, make money on both currency and equity, the stock market. Zhu Rongji and the head of the Hong Kong Monetary Authority raised overnight interest rate to 300% during the attack. Yes, 3-digit rates. This made holding short on Hong Kong dollar position extremely costly. The exchange rate locked at 7.8 Hong Kong dollar to 1 US dollar. The stock market, however, fell sharply. Capital flight increased, but China, under the order of Zhu Rongji, announced that it will use the entire China's own reserve currency to back Hong Kong if needed. This helped boost the confidence of the investors and also the Hong Kong government in its future interventions in the market. In order to defend this kind of speculative attack, a country needs to have a healthy amount of foreign currency reserve and the decisiveness to use this reserve to bet against the speculative attacks. At the beginning of 1997, South Korea had 22 billion US dollar of foreign currency reserve. By the time it surrendered to IMF, it had less than 4 billion. Many South Korean women even volunteered to sell their own jewelry to defend their country's currency.
For those who lived it, this was an unforgettable display of sacrifice and patriotism. Hit hard by the Asian financial crisis, South Korea's government asked the IMF for a $58 billion bailout, and the country wasted no time getting to work on paying it back. Millions donated precious family heirlooms to be melted into gold bars.
Thailand started at around 39 billion. And it used almost its entire foreign currency reserve to bet against the short with 4 contracts. By the end of July, when the Bank of Thailand surrendered, it has less than 2 billion liquidity left.
We try to convince both Thai and foreigner to save their money in Thai. We are working on the dollar bond right now, so we hope that many Thai who work outside the country will send their money to save in Thailand.
Indonesia at that time only had around 25 billion reserve, and speculator hit it with over 100 billion worth of shorts. This enormous speculative exposure dwarfed Indonesia's ability to defend its currency, so it collapsed pretty quickly. Hong Kong, being not a country but a British colony at the beginning of 1997, only held around 40 billion US dollar of reserve, which is quite impressive for a 7 million population city. When it saw the attack coming, the Hong Kong government managed to double its foreign reserve currency to a whopping 90 billion in just a few months. In comparison, the United Kingdom's foreign reserve currency was only at around 25 billion before Scott Bessent and George Soros launched its attack in 1992. In addition, Zhu Rongji committed to defending Hong Kong with China's own reserve currency, which sits around 150 billion US dollar at that time. For months, the Hong Kong dollar held its ground. The Hong Kong government spent billions and billions in protecting its currency and maintaining its strength versus the US dollar. The hedge funds, led by George Soros, tried it again in early 1998. However, Hong Kong government did the unthinkable. It entered the stock market directly, all right? Hong Kong Monetary Authority bought over 15 billion worth of Hong Kong blue chip stocks, around 10% of the market cap, sending a clear signal, a clear message that it is willing to use both monetary and equity intervention to defeat speculators. By September 1998, Soros Fund and other speculators finally gave up their position after suffering huge losses. The Hong Kong dollar survived and the double play tactic failed. The hedge fund lost a lot of money, some say around 10 billion US dollar in total. And that's 10 billion 1997 dollars, all right? George Soros was furious and very pissed off. From the point of view of many Chinese intellectuals and also economists, the 1997 Asian financial crisis was not a random event triggered by private hedge funds, but a coordinated attack by the United States to consolidate its financial empire. If George Soros' attack back then against Hong Kong were successful, it might have snowballed into a scenario that would seriously postpone and delay China's rise in the coming decades, if not face, severe political instability. Let me show you guys what this entire thing means in relationship to what we are dealing with today, okay? In a way that is easy even for non-economist audience to understand. The United States, after going off the gold standard during Nixon era, opened the US dollar floodgate to the world. It also destroyed the original trust Bretton Woods established that a country like the United States need to issue money and spend responsibly, control its fiscal budget. Ever since Nixon, the United States domestic and foreign policy start to converge on how to maintain US dollar's strength and value around the world, while not attached to gold. Its geopolitical plans, its economic strategy, its war around the planet, all prioritize in maintaining that position. When it comes to Asia, it is to dominate and manipulate countries in the region to ultimately turn them into a long-term US economic colony, a satellite. And George Soros' action during 1997, the Asian financial crisis, is part of that greater plan. The US central bank, the Fed, were in coordination to flood the region with cheap US dollar during low interest rate period, and then raise the interest rate followed by intentional financial attack launched as a disguise of third party like quantum fund. And when the countries collapse under pressure, the IMF, also an instrument of US financial empire, come in and dictate the terms and ultimately hijack those countries' financial monetary system. And when the monetary system of those countries were under control by the United States over a period of years and decades, it will often end up also hijacking the political system of those countries because the politicians can't stay loyal to his own country when their paycheck is literally handed out by another country, right? And it's very difficult to reverse this conversion once it progressed deep enough into the power structure. This is what I've been considered what's going on in Europe, especially in Eastern Europe. The power structure of many of these smaller countries wasn't that robust to begin with, to be honest, because they were decades ago and European colonies to begin with, right? What China did is through very smart maneuvering like the one I showed you here during the Asian financial crisis and during other incidents as well, to preserve enough monetary and economic sovereignty in order to sustain its growth. It wasn't perfect. China made a lot of mistakes, but China also made many right decisions that allow it to become what it is today.
We'll see you all later in a couple of hours. Let me just say that we really did have a very useful, very constructive, and very professional discussion across a broad array of issues. And it was very informal and really a very, very useful discussion to have had. We'll see you all later because we are very late to our next meeting.
All right, thank you.
Okay. Mr. Prime Minister, how are you?
Very nice to meet you.
Well, very good to see you again.
You're welcome.
Well, thank you. It's good to see you. I went with the president last night. They stayed the day.
这个你很辛苦啊！我昨天在电视上刚看到你，今天就。
They were rapid, but they were very good.
To me, the ultimate goal, the ultimate end goal of this US empire building project, which I have to admit is quite brilliant actually, is to hijack other countries' political and monetary decision making bodies. So this elite oligarchy class of that country will be loyal, not not exactly to the United States, but to the US dollar and the US financial system to merge into an interdependent creature, some form of ecosystem, in which this country's economy will rely and dependent on the United States monetary liquidity. Even after over long periods of time, this status actually prevent these countries from becoming prosperous. This is accomplished by US constantly instigating financial crisis, which allow US to tax other countries in the system to kind of migrate monetary mistakes and transfer the cost of its overspending, both federal and individual, to other economic bodies. This is one of the biggest reasons why so many countries are stuck in the middle income trap. Because with this financial crisis, the US financial elites are able to dictate and redistribute the wealth into their own pocket at the expense of developing countries, sometimes also at the expense of their own citizens. So these developing countries constantly have to work harder while enjoy a less than fair purchasing power.
Ours is an elegant system conceived to nourish and protect. Your districts are the body. The capital is the beating heart. Your hard work feeds us, and in return, we feed and protect you. But if you resist the system, you starve yourself. If you fight against it, it is you who will bleed. I know you will stand with me, with us, with all of us, together, as one.
For example, the reserve currency of South Korea increased from 20 billion back in 1997 to 400 billion by 2021. Thailand also increased from 20 billion to 220 billion. Indonesia increased to 149 billion, and Hong Kong at the moment also increased to over 400 billion. China at this moment, needless to say, is sitting at 3.4 trillion US dollar. I ask you, my friend, okay, after watching this video, why do this country need so much, reserve currency? Is it not to defend against speculative attacks, a neo-colonial financial operation that pioneered and modernized by people like George Soros and Scott Bessent? Furthermore, what Soros and Bessent did here also accelerated the deindustrialization of the United States because it forced developing countries to sell their resources and labor for cheap. Because at the end, that's the definition of how to earn reserve currency. Instead of getting a higher standard of living, using your purchasing power, you have to reserve part of your labor or raw material value and let it sit in US dollar to defend against future speculative attacks. This made US manufacturing less competitive because these financial attacks has traumatized these developing countries and forced them to sell their sweat for cheap, which on the other hand encouraged the growth of the United States financial sector. So today, when Scott Bessent goes on TV and social media telling Americans that China is being unfair, it needs to spend more and produce less, or something along that line, I'm sitting in front of my screen kind of laughing, and isn't that what you and George Soros did over the years that make China and many other countries behave that way to begin with? Isn't what you did that indirectly drive US dollar to today's artificial value? Because country demand dollar to defend against financial attacks, and those dollars recycle back into the US bond market, which enable America into running fiscal budget equilibrium that kind of built on top of developing countries' growth in a very predatory way, I would say. And also, if Americans look closer and do some research, US is one of the only country in the world to where you are able to buy a house, put down a mortgage payment, and have a fixed rate for something like 30, 40 years, sometimes very low interest rate. This is also because what George Soros and Scott Bessent did, because the US bank can transfer and migrate this low interest rate, sometimes very risky interest rate, to other countries by selling bonds. When Scott Bessent recently went on TV and say that, China is the biggest problem, I totally agree with him actually. You know why? Because Scott Bessent and US business model rely on the world staying divided, because this US tactic of financial monetary extortion rely on countries standing by themselves. And not many countries in the world, even today, can withstand this kind of combined assault by someone like Victoria Nuland and Scott Bessent at the same time. However, what China is doing is that when these countries ran into trouble, especially during US Fed interest rate hike cycle, China can step in and swap those US dollar debt for Chinese renminbi debt. This basically has the effect of shielding those countries away from US attacks and to continue function normally, not getting bankrupt by the US again, and again, like Argentina. Back in 1970s, US economy size is 3 times of that of South America. Today, it is 6 times of South America. You think that is random? No, that is by design. What China did, thanks to people like Zhu Rongji, is to implement many tactics that shield its economy from US monetary extortion to permit long-term sustainable growth while maintaining its political sovereignty. We sacrifice some monetary sovereignty, yes, but that's the price in order to remain in this US Western dominated financial system. And what China has done recently during the most recent interest rate hike cycle is to shield many other countries as well, especially in Southeast Asia, by enabling trade outside of the US dollar. This and many other tactics basically prevented US extortion strategy, which is what US has developed into over the years, a country that has based on service sector business and also financial monetary extortion. This is a problem though, as you can see, because every country China stood up to defend is one less country US can extort, which make the US business model weaker, which is also fundamental reason why there's a bond market problem today. The US bond market, by the way, is much bigger than the US stock market, and that's only on paper because stock market, the way it is built in United States and also everywhere else, is usually just a bubble. And the bond market is solid numbers. So the bond market and the fundamental economic philosophy behind the US bond market is the clearest indicator that US is operating an empire. In my opinion, it is very difficult for the United States to adjust backward into a normal nation, because the entire US political system, education system, and many other is built around to reinforce and sustain this monetary, military, and ideological hybrid empire. It's not built to compete in industrial production with China. It is a system that built around taxing other economy. I bet the struggle Elon Musk had with the administration also has to do with some of these. There are a huge part of the federal fiscal budget that Trump and Musk just cannot touch, not currently, even with them working together closely. That part of the United States, the deep state, what we refer to, is just too powerful for Musk and Trump to challenge at the moment. Stephen Miller's Mar-a-Lago Accord is so bloody honest. It proposed to tax other economy with a base 10% tariff because US is basically running a world government to maintain this kind of global stability and balance, and what's what they call it. What he meant in honesty is if you guys are willing to pay directly, then US don't have to send CIAs and Scott Bessent around to create chaos, to guide you to recycle those US dollars. Why would you and all those countries purchase US bonds at sometimes 1% interest rate if US didn't have all those proxies running around make a mess of the world? Why would the US financial market be the safe haven? I mean, safety is a relative term, right? You need to have people out there making the world unsafe to begin with. So if you understand this mechanic, the United States war machine, their targets are strategically chosen. If US dollar do not face problems, the financial market is stable, the US war machine can just milk cash in places like Afghanistan. That's when China and Japan and all those developing countries are willing to obey and recycle the US dollar to the US financial market. However, when US dollar face challenge, the war machine will turn towards provoking war in regions that has highest level of capital condensation, which is usually Europe, Middle East, and Asia, mainly East Asia and Southeast Asia. So here you can see a cooperation between the MIC and the financial sector of the United States. And their decision power often always exceeds of that in the White House, making people question whether the US president has any real power. Also led to conspiracy theories such as the deep state. Over the years, even many American citizens no longer buy the propaganda and excuses conjured up by the mainstream media, which also happen to be received massive funding from George Soros. Americans question that its own foreign policy seems to be not serving the interests of the United States, right? So in my opinion, if you use what I said here in this video to predict the position and action of Americans' foreign policy and war, it will be a lot more accurate than following those ideological narratives. When Trump is sitting there talking about this beautiful bill and make America great again, and how previous presidents are all bad and it is their fault and their inaction that brought America to where we are today. And the guy who is somewhat responsible for creating the problem US and the world is in today, Scott Bessent and George Soros and his team, is standing next to Donald Trump. To me, that's kind of ironic, dark sense of humor. Theatric at its best. Scott Bessent, telling all these countries to balance their trade or even run a trade deflect versus the United States. So US can own less debt while threatening everyone to stay in the dollar system at the same time. I mean, seriously, I admire US ruling elites, sense of humor. It's like the Vikings who ransack your village many times now stand in front of your village gate because you spend much of the effort to build a wall to defend against him. And that exact person, that exact Viking leader, is standing in front of your gate telling these countries to open their gate. And then at the same time claiming China, who helped this country to build those defensive wall, that China is actually the evil that's taking advantage of you. Of course, from the US empire perspective, it is frustrating, definitely. It's like the movie Matrix, right? China unplugged itself from the Matrix, and it is going around unplugging other countries from the Matrix as well. That's not good for the United States. Seriously, we need to make a freaking Netflix movie out of this. You can't make this script up. So I ask you guys, what is this? Is this some kind of George Soros, Scott Bessent atonement project to fix the problem they have created in the first place? Are these an act of desperation, to keep the wheels of the empire rolling? And this is also one of the fundamental reasons why US has to go after Russia and, breaking it away from Europe. If China and its neighbors are not willing to pay their tribute, then America have to go after its allies, right? Europeans need to make up the difference. You see the relationship here? If US is comfortable extorting just wealth out of the developing countries in Asia like China and Southeast Asia, then it won't have to turn its teeth towards its own allies. So everything that the Biden administration did and said, and also today what the Trump administration said and did, are all basically just a sugar-coated version of what I said in this video. Trump has much less sugarcoating, more direct than Biden, of course. It is not comfortable for regular Americans to listen to face this kind of reality. Not everyone can survive being unplugged from the matrix. Reality can be very traumatizing. And really, no offense, I have a bunch of American audience who watch my channel. Be honest with me now, how many of you guys know about this stuff I'm talking about in this video, which only scratched the surface? But you know what? After watching this video, don't go and blame everything on Bessent or Soros. If my channel gets shut down tomorrow, if I get to, do just one interview with whoever I want in this world, George Soros will be actually on top of my list. There's quite a few things I want to ask him about, philosophy, about this world, how it should be run. And also, I fundamentally do not have a problem with empires or US being an empire. It's just not managed in a way that is sustainable right now. Quite destructive in many ways to the world, actually. Something Americans need to fix, and fix quickly, whether the empire continues or not. Hope you guys enjoyed this video. I will be on a trip to Japan. I'll see you guys in a few weeks.